by context of the recent cyber attack at Optus and other organisations, the ACMA chair, the Australian Communications and Media Authority chair, Ms. Nerida Lachlan, she recently said, a great quote, customers rightly expect that information will be properly safeguarded when entrusting their personal information. Organisations have obligations regarding how they acquire, retain, protect, and dispose of the personal information of their customers. With that in mind, and with the Privacy Act in mind, how important is securing customer information?
Oh, it's critical. In the past, personal information, data was like hot property. People would go out there, or organisations would go out there and gobble it up so they can monetize it. Fair enough. That was the world back then. Now it's more like a hot potato, because if you're exposed or expose people's personal information, you expose not only their information, you expose your company to huge damages. The federal government's recently introduced some more sanctions, but beyond that, there's reputational risk. So these days, companies and organisations, governments alike, need to be a little bit more sanguine in relation to holding on information. The Europeans are doing a good job in relation to GDPR. And America's got their own push. California's doing some amazing work. But, this is part of that new world that we need to curate together in relation to, preserving and protecting people's personal information. Because once that gets eroded, then people will start losing trust in institutions, organizations. Now, if you lose trust in a company, that's easy. You just go to the next company and buy their product. But if you start losing trust in a government, then that really erodes democracy. And that's why preserving privacy and security and ethics is such an important play in our digital world. And it's been one of the big drivers for us over the last 4 or 5 years.
You've actually answered my next question, which was going to be about misuse of data. We collect a lot of data.
A lot.
And beyond the cybersecurity threats, it's when we store all this information, and corporations store a lot of information. There's a plethora of data out there, which is, it turns into information, and then insights are drawn out of it for the right purposes. But being responsible with the data we store is paramount.
Yeah, well, I was recently talking to people in the real estate sector. Mm-hmm. Now, you think about the breaches that have occurred to Optus and Medibank. These are major corporations that have the capability and the resources to implement best practice when it comes to cyber settings, and yet breaches occurred there. Imagine the smaller players like the local real estate agent. They've got no chance of competing in terms of their cyber posture or hygiene with the big players. So it shows how challenging and complex this new world is. But it also underscores the importance of getting this right. Yeah, and I personally think we do need a national inquiry, national forum into this. So, because these breaches are just going to keep occurring, there's just no doubt about that. Yeah. So, my question is, what is best practice response? What does that look like? We've seen different types of responses. Sometimes it's too much information, misinformation, no information. What does a good look like in terms of a cyber breach? And then what are the other protections that we can put in place that will, again, frame us up for the next decade and beyond? I personally think that digital identity is critical, because that means the individual has far more control over who they share information with, what they share, what gets destroyed. Yeah. So I think that's the way Australia has to go. It's a question of how quickly we get there.
If I was to ask you, how does biometric identification or recognition fits into all that?
Well, look, that's just yet another marker in terms of security. So already, some people have different ways to protect their account. Some people have a 4-number passcode. Yeah. Some people use their first street's name and their first dog's name. It depends. Biometrics like 1,000 points. It's just another marker. Difference with biometric though is you only got one of them. So that's why it's much harder. The thing where governments have to move in the future is to make sure we don't create honeypots. So, when you centralize data stores into one centralized location, one hack into that and everything gets unpacked. But if you've got your key and the government's got one key, that means for a mass attack, they're going to have to get 8 million keys as well as the honeypot simultaneously. It's going to be impossible. So sure, they might break into 5 or 6 people, but by that stage, we're on top of it. And then it's a question of how do we quickly respond to make sure you're back on your feet quickly. But these are the challenges of our world. Unless we have mature discussions around this with solutions in place, we're just going to keep doing the same old, and have more and more privacy breaches. And it's one thing of a privacy breach, but when you're starting to get cyber terrorist style breaches that impacts on infrastructure, that's another level of pain altogether. So again, these are the discussions we have to have as a mature nation.
Security, of course, takes when you take into account internal fraud within the organisations, or even within the government, if you wish, as well as human error, where people just leave credentials, leave the door open accidentally.